She had given 30 years of her life to that company. 30 years of waking up before the sun rose. 30 years of putting on the same quiet smile even when her heart felt heavy. 30 years of believing that loyalty meant something. Her name was Marissa. And at 50 years old she thought she was safe. She thought she had earned security. She thought she had earned respect. But life has a strange way of rewriting stories when you least expect it. That morning felt different. The air in the office was colder. The usual chatter felt distant, like it belonged to another world. People avoided her eyes. Conversation stopped when she walked past. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a quiet uneasiness began to grow. When her manager called her into the office, her steps felt heavier than usual. Each step echoing with something she could not yet understand. She sat down, hands folded neatly in her lap, trying to hold on to the calm she had carried for years. But the moment she looked at their faces, she knew. 3 people sitting across from her, none of them able to meet her eyes. And then the words came. They told her the company was restructuring. They told her her position was no longer needed. They told her it was not personal. Not personal. After 30 years. The words felt hollow. Empty. Almost cruel. She listened quietly, her heart pounding loudly in her ears. She nodded. Not because she agreed, but because she refused to break in front of them. They handed her papers, explained her exit, thanked her for her service. Thanked her. As if gratitude could replace everything she had lost. She stood up slowly, picked up the small box they had placed beside her. A box filled with pieces of her life. Photographs. Notes. Small memories that once made that place feel like home. And then she walked out. No one stopped her. No one said anything. It was as if she had already disappeared. The moment she reached her car, the silence wrapped around her like a storm. And suddenly, she could not hold it anymore. The tears came rushing out. Fast. Uncontrollable. Her hands trembled against the steering wheel. Her breath uneven. Her heart shattered into pieces she could not gather. What now? The question echoed inside her again and again. What now? At 50 years old. Who would hire her? Who would see her value? The world suddenly felt smaller. Harsher. Unforgiving. That night her home did not feel like comfort. It felt like a reminder. Of responsibilities. Of bills. Of uncertainty waiting at her door. She sat at the edge of her bed staring into nothing. Her mind racing through every possible fear. She had no backup plan. No savings big enough to carry her through. Only memories of a life she thought was secure. But the next morning, she forced herself to get up. Because giving up was never something she had learned. She opened her laptop and began applying for jobs. One after another. Sending resumes into the unknown. Waiting. Hoping. Days turned into weeks. And the silence grew louder. Rejections started arriving. Some polite. Some cold. Some not even worth reading. You are overqualified. You do not fit the role. We have chosen another candidate. Each message cutting a little deeper. Each rejection chipping away at her confidence. She began to question herself. Was she too old? Was she no longer needed? The world she had trusted for decades now felt like a place that had no space for her. Interviews came occasionally. But they never went far. She noticed the way they looked at her. The subtle doubt in their smiles. The unspoken hesitation in their tone. And slowly, hope began to fade. One evening, after another rejection, She sat in her kitchen staring at an empty cup. And for the first time, she felt truly lost. Not just unemployed, but invisible. Like everything she had built, everything she had given, meant nothing. The tears returned. But this time they were quieter. Heavier. Filled with something deeper than pain. They were filled with doubt. And in that moment, she reached her lowest point. She thought about giving up. Thought about accepting whatever life decided to give her. But something inside her refused to stay silent. A small voice. Barely noticeable. Yet impossible to ignore. It reminded her of who she used to be. Strong. Capable. Resilient. It whispered that maybe. Just maybe. This was not the end. But a beginning. She did not fully believe it. Not yet. But she held on to that thought. Like a fragile piece of hope. Days later, while cleaning her house, she came across something unexpected. An old notebook. Filled with ideas she had once written years ago. Dreams she had buried under responsibilities. Plans she had never pursued. Because life had taken over. She flipped through the pages slowly. Reading words written by a younger version of herself. A version that believed in possibilities. One idea caught her attention. Simple. Yet powerful. Something she had once been passionate about. She sat there for a long time. Thinking. Wondering. What if? What if she tried? What if instead of waiting for someone to give her a chance, she created her own? The thought scared her. But it also ignited something she had not felt in years. Purpose. The next morning, she made a decision. Not a perfect plan. Not a guaranteed success. Just a decision. She would try. She started small. Using what little savings she had. Working from her home. Learning things she had never done before. Facing challenges she had never imagined. There were moments she wanted to quit. Moments where fear returned stronger than ever. But each time, she reminded herself. She had already lost everything. There was nothing left to fear. Slowly, things began to change. Not overnight. Not easily. But steadily. One customer turned into two. Two turned into 5. Small wins began to build. Each one giving her a little more confidence. A little more strength. She worked harder than she ever had before. Long nights. Early mornings. But this time, it felt different. This time, she was building something for herself. Months passed. And the business began to grow. Faster than she expected. Opportunities started appearing. People started noticing. The same world that once ignored her was now paying attention. And then, one day, she looked at her numbers and realized something unbelievable. She had made more money in 1 month than she ever had in her old job. She sat there in silence, tears filling her eyes once again. But this time, they were not tears of pain. They were tears of victory. Of disbelief. Of gratitude. The woman who once sat in her car broken and lost was now standing stronger than ever. She was no longer waiting for approval. No longer seeking validation. She had created her own path. Her own success. And the most powerful part. She had proven something not just to the world, but to herself. That it is never too late. Never too late to start again. Never too late to rise. Never too late to become more. And as she stood there looking out the window, a quiet smile formed on her face. Because deep inside, she finally understood. Losing that job was not the end. It was the greatest beginning of her life. The next morning did not bring hope. It brought reality. A heavy kind of silence filled her home. The kind that reminds you something is missing. Something important. She woke up at the same time out of habit. Her body still following a routine that no longer existed. For a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling, as if waiting for everything to go back to normal. But nothing did. There was no rush. No office to go to. No purpose waiting at the door. Just emptiness. She slowly sat up. Her movements quieter than usual. As if even the walls were watching her. The coffee tasted different that day. Not warm and comforting, but bitter. Like reality settling in. She opened her laptop again, determined to keep trying. Job applications became her new routine. Hour after hour. Scrolling, searching, applying. Each click filled with hope. Each submission carrying a silent prayer. Please let this one work. Days passed like this. And slowly, that hope began to wear thin. Emails started arriving. We regret to inform you. We have decided to move forward with other candidates. The words blurred together. Each one sounding exactly the same. Each one closing another door. She tried to stay strong, telling herself it was just part of the process. But deep down, something was changing. Every rejection felt personal. Every silence felt louder. She began to notice the way people spoke to her in interviews. Polite but distant. Respectful but unsure. They asked about her experience. But their eyes questioned her age. They smiled. But their decisions told a different story. And slowly, a painful truth started to settle in. The world she once gave everything to no longer had space for her. One afternoon, after yet another interview that went nowhere, she sat in her car again. The same place where everything had first broken. Only this time, there were no tears. Just exhaustion. The kind that reaches your soul. She leaned back, closing her eyes. And for a moment, she allowed herself to feel it all. The disappointment. The fear. The quiet anger she had been holding inside. Why? Why, after giving so much, was she left with nothing? Why did loyalty mean so little? The questions had no answers. And that made it even harder. When she got home, the house felt colder. The bills on the table seemed heavier. Every number staring back at her, reminding her that time was not on her side. She sat down slowly, picking up one bill after another, doing the math in her head, calculating how long she could survive like this. The answer scared her. It was not long. That night she barely slept. Her mind racing. Her heart restless. Every possible worst-case scenario playing over and over again. What if she lost the house? What if she could not find anything? What if this was it? What if her life had already peaked? The thought hit harder than anything else. Because it carried a quiet finality. As if everything ahead of her was just decline. But something inside her resisted that idea. Something refused to accept that her story was already written. The next few weeks became a cycle. Apply, wait, get rejected, repeat. Each day blending into the next. Time moving but nothing changing. She stopped answering calls from friends. Stopped explaining her situation. Because saying it out loud made it real. And she was not ready for that. She began to withdraw. Not from the world, but from herself. The confident woman she once was started to fade. Replaced by someone quieter. More uncertain. She avoided mirrors. Because she no longer recognized the person looking back. One evening, while sitting alone in her living room, she heard laughter outside. Neighbors living their lives, moving forward without pause. And for a moment, she felt left behind. Like the world was moving, and she was standing still. That feeling broke something inside her. Not loudly, but deeply. She lowered her head, hands resting in her lap, and whispered softly, "What am I supposed to do now?" No one answered. Only silence. But in that silence, something unexpected began to shift. Not immediately. Not clearly. Just a small change. A thought. Barely noticeable. What if? What if this moment, this pain, this uncertainty, was not punishment? What if it was something else? Something she could not yet understand. She did not have the answer. But the question stayed with her. Quietly. Waiting. And somewhere deep inside, a spark, very small, almost invisible, began to form. Not strong enough to guide her. Not bright enough to light the way. But enough to remind her that maybe, just maybe, this was not where her story ended. Days turned into weeks. And weeks began to feel heavier than months. Time was moving. But her life felt stuck. Every morning she woke up with the same weight in her chest. A heaviness that refused to leave. She tried to stay busy. Tried to keep herself distracted. But the silence always found its way back. The job applications had slowed down. Not because opportunities had increased, but because hope had decreased. It became harder to believe. Harder to try. Each rejection had taken something from her. Confidence. Energy. Belief. Until one day, she sat in front of her laptop, staring at the screen. And for the first time, she could not bring herself to click apply. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but they would not move. It was as if something inside her had given up. Not loudly, but quietly. She closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in her chair. Her eyes empty. Her mind silent. This was her lowest point. Not the day she lost her job. Not the moment she walked out of that office. But this. This moment where she no longer believed in herself. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. Everything around her seemed to close in. She stood up slowly, walking toward the mirror, hesitating before looking. And when she finally did, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The strength that once lived in her eyes was gone, replaced by doubt. She reached out gently, touching the mirror, as if trying to reconnect with someone she had lost. "Who are you?" The question slipped out softly, not expecting an answer, because she did not have one. That evening, she did something she had not done in years. She sat in complete darkness. No lights. No distractions. Just herself. And her thoughts. At first, it was uncomfortable. The silence pressing against her, forcing her to feel everything she had been avoiding. The fear. The failure. The uncertainty. It all came rushing in. Her breathing became heavier. Her chest tightened. And then, the tears came again. But these were different. Not sudden. Not overwhelming. Slow. Steady. Like a quiet surrender. She let them fall. For a long time. Longer than she could remember. There was no one to see. No one to judge. Just her. And the truth she could no longer ignore. She was scared. Not just of losing everything, but of never becoming anything again. That fear cut deeper than anything else. Because it challenged everything she believed about herself. For so many years, her identity had been tied to her work. Her value measured by her role. Her worth defined by what she did. And now, that was gone. So who was she without it? The question echoed inside her. Louder than anything else. And for a moment, she felt completely lost. Like a stranger in her own life. Hours passed. And the tears slowly stopped. Her breathing steadied. The storm inside her began to quiet. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. She started thinking. Not about her fears, but about her past. Memories began to surface. Moments she had forgotten. Dreams she had once held. Goals she had once believed in. Before life became routine. Before responsibilities took over. She remembered a younger version of herself. Full of ideas. Full of energy. Full of belief. A version that did not wait for permission. A version that created her own path. The memory felt distant. But it also felt real. And for the first time in weeks, a different emotion appeared. Not hope. Not yet. But curiosity. What happened to her? Where did she go? The question stayed with her. Lingering. She stood up slowly. Walking toward a small drawer she had not opened in years. Her hands hesitated. But something pushed her forward. She pulled it open. Inside were old papers. Notebooks. Pieces of a life she had forgotten. She picked one up. Dust falling gently as she opened it. And as her eyes moved across the pages, her heart skipped a beat. Ideas. Plans. Dreams. Written in her own handwriting. From years ago. She sat down quickly. Turning page after page. Reading words that felt both familiar and foreign. It was her. But not the version she knew now. This was someone else. Someone fearless. Someone who believed in more. One idea caught her attention. Simple. Clear. Something she had once been passionate about. She paused. Reading it again. And again. Feeling something stir inside her. A small spark. Barely noticeable. But real. She held the notebook close. Her mind racing. Not with fear. But with possibility. For the first time in a long time. She was not thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she could create. The thought scared her. But it also excited her. A feeling she had almost forgotten. She sat there in silence. Holding on to that moment. Because deep inside, she knew. Something had shifted. Not completely. Not instantly. But enough. Enough to change direction. Enough to take one small step forward. And sometimes, that is all it takes. One moment. One thought. One decision. To begin again. She sat there for a long time. The notebook still open in her hands. Her eyes fixed on those old words. They did not feel like memories anymore. They felt like a message. A reminder of who she once was. And who she could still become. Her heart was beating differently now. Not heavy like before. But uncertain. Alive. The idea stayed in her mind. Refusing to leave. It was simple. Almost too simple. And yet it carried something powerful. Something real. She whispered softly. What if I try? The words felt unfamiliar. But they also felt right. For so long she had been waiting. Waiting for someone to give her a chance. Waiting for approval. Waiting for the world to decide her value. But what if she stopped waiting? What if she decided? The thought made her nervous. Her mind quickly filled with doubts. What if it fails? What if I lose what little I have left? What if I am not good enough? The questions came fast. But this time, they did not stop her. Because another voice rose quietly. Stronger than before. What if it works? She closed her eyes. Holding on to that question. Letting it settle. Because for the first time, the fear of staying the same felt greater than the fear of trying. That night she made a decision. Not a perfect plan. Not a detailed strategy. Just a decision. She would begin. The next morning felt different. Not easier. Not lighter. But purposeful. She woke up with something she had not felt in weeks. Direction. She cleared a small space in her home. Nothing fancy. Nothing perfect. Just enough to start. She took out the notebook again. Reading every detail carefully. Turning old ideas into something real. Something she could build. She spent hours researching. Learning things she had never needed before. Terms she did not understand. Tools she had never used. It was overwhelming. There were moments she wanted to stop. Moments where everything felt too big. Too complicated. But each time, she reminded herself. You have come this far. You cannot turn back now. Days turned into nights. And nights into early mornings. She worked longer than she ever had before. But this time, there was no boss watching. No expectations from others. Just her. And her belief. She started small. Very small. Using what she had. Doing what she could. The first attempt was not perfect. Far from it. Mistakes happened. Things went wrong. Plans failed. But she kept going. Because every mistake taught her something. Every failure made her stronger. There were days when nothing worked. Days when she questioned everything again. But this time, she did not fall apart. Because something inside her had changed. She was no longer trying to prove herself to others. She was proving something to herself. One evening, after weeks of effort, something unexpected happened. Her first result. Small. Almost insignificant. But real. Someone believed in what she created. Someone said yes. She stared at the screen. Her heart racing. Reading the message again and again. Making sure it was real. And then, a slow smile formed on her face. Not big. Not loud. But genuine. It was the first time in a long time. She felt proud. Not because of the outcome. But because she had not given up. That one moment changed everything. It was no longer just an idea. It was possible. She held on to that feeling. Letting it grow. Because now, she had proof. Proof that she could still build something. From nothing. Days passed. And she kept working. With more focus. More belief. Each step becoming clearer. Each challenge becoming easier to face. The fear did not disappear. But it no longer controlled her. Because now, she had something stronger. Hope. Real hope. Not the kind that waits. But the kind that moves. The kind that builds. The kind that refuses to stop. And as she sat there late one night, working quietly, A thought crossed her mind. This is just the beginning. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The days no longer felt empty. They felt full. Full of effort. Full of purpose. Full of something she had not felt in a long time. Belief. She woke up earlier now. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. There was something waiting for her each morning. Something she was building with her own hands. The small space in her home had changed. It was no longer just a corner. It had become her world. Her focus. Her mission. She worked through challenges that once would have stopped her. Problems that used to feel overwhelming now felt like steps. Each one leading her forward. Slowly. Steadily. Things began to grow. What started as one became a few. What felt uncertain began to feel real. People started noticing. Not loudly. Not all at once. But quietly. Word spread. One person told another. Then another. And just like that, momentum began to build. She did not realize it at first. Because she was too focused on the work. Too focused on improving. On learning. On becoming better every single day. But the results were there. Growing. Right in front of her. The same world that once ignored her was now responding. Emails changed. Messages felt different. Instead of rejection, there was interest. Instead of silence, there were opportunities. She read each message carefully. Her heart still not fully used to this new reality. But with every step forward, her confidence returned. Stronger than before. Because this time, it was built on her own foundation. Not given by someone else. Earned. Through struggle. Through persistence. Through belief. There were still difficult days. Moments where things did not go as planned. But they no longer broke her. Because she had learned something powerful. Failure is not the end. It is part of the process. And she trusted that process now. Completely. Months passed. And the growth became impossible to ignore. What once felt small had become something significant. Something real. Something strong. One evening, she sat down to review everything. Numbers. Progress. Results. And as her eyes moved across the screen, her breath caught. She paused. Looking again. Making sure she was not imagining it. But it was real. The numbers were higher than anything she had ever seen before. Higher than her old salary. Higher than anything she thought possible. Her hand slowly covered her mouth. As tears filled her eyes once again. But these tears were different. They carried no pain. Only disbelief. Only gratitude. Only pride. She leaned back in her chair. Letting the moment sink in. The same woman who once sat in her car. Broken. Lost. Afraid of the future. Was now sitting here. Strong. Independent. Successful. Not because someone gave her a chance. But because she created one. She thought about that day. The day she was told she was no longer needed. The day everything felt like it ended. And for the first time, she smiled at that memory. Because now she understood something she could not see before. That moment was not rejection. It was redirection. Life had pushed her out. Not to destroy her. But to force her into something greater. Something she would have never chosen on her own. She stood up slowly. Walking toward the window. Looking out at the world that once felt so distant. And now felt open. full of possibility. Her reflection in the glass caught her attention. And this time, she recognized the woman looking back. Not the same as before, but stronger, wiser, more alive. She placed her hand gently against the glass, a quiet smile forming on her face. You made it. The words were soft, but powerful, because they carried truth. She had made it through the doubt, through the fear, through the moments where giving up felt easier. She had chosen to continue. And that choice changed everything. As the night settled in, she remained there for a moment longer, taking it all in. Not rushing, not chasing, just appreciating. Because deep inside, she knew this was not just success. This was transformation. This was proof that no matter how late it feels, no matter how far you fall, there is always a way forward. Always a chance to begin again. And as she turned away from the window, walking back into the life she had built, one truth stayed with her, clear and unshakable. Being fired at 50 was never the end of her story. It was the moment her real life finally began.